This presentation will provide tips to ensure your PowerPoints are accessible. Designing an accessible PowerPoint is easy and requires some thought, planning, and knowledge. In this presentation, I will provide sample slides. We'll address some of the accessibility issues. I'll show how to correct some of those issues. I'll also provide some tips and some takeaways. The next couple of slides were selected from various presentations used by Empire State College's Office of Academic Support. These slides depict a typical format used to deliver content by this office. Here's one particular example. We have a title, some content, and an image. Looks pretty clean. The second slide, very simple, a title and a list of content which is bulletized. This slide is very similar to the first one I showed you. We have a title, we have content, some of the content is bolded and underlined, as well as an image. Again, another slide, simple, have a title, and we have some content. Again, very similar to the slides I've already shown. We have a title, and one of the things I should note is the title is, the text is white with the orange background, so it's easy to read. We have some content, and we have an image. So this slide is a little bit different than what I've already shown you. Similar, obviously, is the title. We do have some content, a little bit more content, I should say. We have an image in the background, and we have a URL. The final slide is this particular one. Again, very similar to what I've already shown you, but again, I just wanted to show you that there's a URL displayed within the content. I presented several slides. On the onset, we might say that some of them are accessible, but to make sure, we need to perform the accessibility checker. To do that, we go to the main menu, select File, then select the button that says Check for Issues, and then we'll get a list of options. We want to select Check Accessibility. When this process is performed, the checker will display any issues, the type of issues, and where those issues exist on what slide. In this case, the accessibility checker identified several issues which are reflected in the picture. However, don't worry about that. I'm going to read them off. The first issue was a lack of descriptions for the pictures. Unclear and lack of information regarding all the links. Titles that were identical, and information on the slide appeared to be out of order, posing a problem to the screen reader. Let's look at how to correct some of those issues. The first slide I displayed looked fine, when in fact the slide is not accessible due to the lack of description for the picture. A screen reader will not be able to identify this picture without a description, therefore the viewer will not understand that there is an image on the screen. Ensuring a slide with a picture is accessible, alt text is a function required to describe the picture so the screen reader can read the description to a person who is visually impaired. Add a description is easy. So the first step is to right-click on the picture, select Format, then select Alt Text option. Add a title and a description if necessary. When the screen reader arrives at the picture, the title and description will be read to the individual. Here's another slide I displayed. This particular image also lacked a description. However, adding a description now makes this slide accessible. The second issue identified is a lack of a description for several of the links displayed on my sample slides. The steps are as follows. You're going to highlight the link, you're going to select Insert on the menu, and then you're going to click Hyperlink to edit link. Add text to display in the dialog box, and then provide more detailed information by clicking this green tip. The picture actually shows you several of those steps. So let's look at some of the slides with the corrections. This particular slide has two issues. I will only address the link issue and the other later. The link displayed on the original slide lacked a description. To correct the slide, the link was replaced with an appropriate descriptive link indicating where the link would take the viewer. So the replacement now reads learningstylesonline.com, overview of learning styles. So now when the screen reader gets to this particular link, this is what's going to be read to the viewer. Like the previous slide, this slide also lacked a description for the link. The correction replaced the URL with a description of what the link is and where the link is taking the viewer. In this case, it's Assignment Calculator, located at the University of Connecticut website. The screen reader can now easily read an appropriate descriptive of the link to the viewer. The third issue identified was duplicate titles. Duplicate titles can pose navigational and comprehension issues, as one might think the slide content is being repeated. The next two slides reflect identical titles. This slide and the following slide reflect titles that were duplicate. There are several ways to correct this. Alter one of the titles, or in this case, I added Part 1 and Part 2, which you will see when I go to the second slide, to indicate that there were two parts to this topic. So this is the second slide where I identified this as Part 2. So now the titles are not identical, and that when the screen reader comes across this slide and the previous slide, there's not going to be any confusion and wondering if in fact this is a slide that's being repeated. The fourth issue identified was the order of the information on the slide. This is important as the information will be read by the screen reader in the order in which the information is depicted on the slide. The order needs to make sense. Some of the slides had the title last, which should be first, so the viewer can comprehend what the slide content will represent. So to correct, go to Home tab, select Arrange, choose Selection Pane, and arrange the content on the slide that has been identified. There were slides with no accessibility issues, and I thought it was important to show those. This slide passed the accessibility check. One could argue it is boring, and visually speaking it is. A picture could be added as long as there was a description attached to the image, but I chose not to insert a picture. Another issue someone could raise is a slide contains too much text. This slide could be broken up if it makes sense. However, remember the slide passed the accessibility check. And again, the rule of thumb, small chunks of information and 1 to 2 sentences are easily read and comprehended. This slide is also accessible. The font style and size are appropriate and easy to read. The font size is 24, but could have easily been 18, which is a recommended size for PowerPoint presentations. Also notice that each title on each slide, as I mentioned before, have white text against an orange background. The text is clear and not visibly difficult to read. If I were to use yellow text, for instance, this would be an example where the text would be difficult to read on an orange background and would be deemed inaccessible. I mentioned before a particular slide that had two issues and that I would address that later. So let's do that now. This slide, although not identified by the checker, does have some visual conflicts, and I would deem this as inaccessible. The picture behind the text is competing with the main content of the slide. The image itself is adding no value, is washed out, making it hard to read, and it is complex. I would recommend replacing this image with another image or not adding any image, as there are 8 points of information on this slide. The next two slides I've identified some tips to remember. These tips, along with other information presented in this PowerPoint, will make your PowerPoints accessible. So here are a few. Animations and transitions should be avoided, as they are problematic to various types of learning disabilities and honestly are not necessary. If closed caption is not an option, but open is, then use open. Always keep it simple. Simple allows for easy comprehension. Use layout options or templates provided within PowerPoint. This will ensure, again, if you follow what has been presented in this presentation, an accessible PowerPoint and a consistent format that is easy to follow. Further, using these built-in options, time will be saved as accessible modifications will not be necessary. And lastly, if the slide is difficult to understand because of color contrast or if the image is washed out, avoid it. Here are the last list of tips. Avoid those text boxes. They just confuse the issue. As with images and links, complex graphs and tables should also be explained. Tables that don't have headers or are too big are also problematic for screen readers. The navigation and comprehension of those tables will not be possible. And then finally, again, if possible, provide an audio, as this is a great second way to convey information provided on a PowerPoint, and as a default, provide a transcript. It can't hurt. My 2 words of wisdom: navigation and comprehension. When designing your PowerPoint, viewers must be able to move through the presentation without barriers and difficulty, and understand the slides as well as make meaningful connections. If we remember these 2 words, navigation and comprehension, and follow the many tips and the information provided in this presentation, you will have accessible PowerPoints.